The White House physician says Joe Biden is almost symptom-free as he recovers from COVID-19 in Delaware. Kevin O'Connor said that Biden is in good condition and has been fulfilling his presidential duties from home. However, Biden has not made a public appearance since he suspended his re-election campaign over the weekend. Vice President Kamala Harris continues to rack up presidential endorsements, including Alex Soros, the son of Democrat mega donor George Soros, as well as Bill and Hillary Clinton. However, Harris has yet to get the blessings from the Obamas. And the House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer and Ranking Member Jamie Raskin have called for the resignation of Kimberly Cheatle, the director of the Secret Service. So we've got those stories and so much more. Blaze News Tonight starts right now. Welcome to the chaos. I'm Jill Savage. Today is Monday, July 22nd. We seem to get more questions than answers with every passing day since the Trump assassination attempt. Unfortunately, Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheatle's congressional testimony did little to help answer any of those questions.
One of the things that you said, I believe, in an interview, that there wasn't an agent on the roof because it was a sloped roof. Is that normal? And do you fear that immediately creates an opportunity for future would-be assassins to look for a slanted roof? I mean, this is a huge question that every American has. Why wasn't a Secret Service agent on the roof? And there have been reports that agents were supposed to be on the roof, but it was hot that day and they didn't want to be on the roof. Can you answer any of those questions, Director?
So I appreciate you asking me that question, Chairman. I should have been more clear in my answer when I spoke about where we placed personnel in that interview. What I can tell you is that there was a plan in place to provide overwatch, and we are still looking into responsibilities and who was going to provide overwatch. But the Secret Service in general, not speaking specifically to this incident, when we are providing overwatch, whether that be through counter snipers or other technology, prefer to have sterile rooftops.
Did the Secret Service use any drones for surveillance that day?
So again, I'm not going to get into specifics of that day in itself.
To help me break it all down, Matthew Peterson is the editor-in-chief of Blaze News. Steve Baker is an investigative journalist for Blaze News. And we also are joined by Steve Krakauer, the editor and host of Fourth Watch Media and the author of Uncovered: How the Media Got Cozy with Power, Abandoned Its Principles, and Lost the People. So, Steve Krakauer, I want to start with you. We've watched so many House committee hearings. So this one is definitely a train wreck. So why hasn't Cheatle resigned yet?
I can't figure out why she hasn't resigned. I can't really figure out why she didn't come in 9 days after an assassination attempt with at least some modicum of answers to this. She doesn't have to give out all the answers. Obviously, there's certain sensitive information that she can't say. But when you are obfuscate, when you just completely refuse to give even the most basic information that Congresspeople on both sides of the aisle are asking for, Democrats and Republicans are just asking for basic answers. AOC was going after her. Why? Because she refuses to give even an inch. And that just completely destroys trust in obviously the Secret Service, but it's par for the course these days, it feels like, with these kinds of investigations, with these kinds of leaders that we have.
Matthew?
Yeah, I think the big picture here, and you saw it in really an appalling way today, is that the administrative state doesn't worry about what Congress thinks. Congress is its creature. Congress is not in charge of it. Congress has not been able to roll it back. And frankly, no president has ever been able to roll it back in its entire history from the time that World War II ended until now. So the idea that this organization gets more powerful, the administrative state gets more powerful, and you'll have people like her just standing there. The attitude was what was appalling. It's why members of both parties, right, as you pointed out, were so upset, because she's sitting there looking like, you can't fire me, and who will?
Yeah. Steve Baker, I know that you've been watching all day, and you went through and you just keep asking all of these questions that these guys have said. So what comes to mind when you were watching it today earlier and just thinking all of the incompetence that just keeps coming out of her mouth every single time she answers a question?
Well, first of all, 90% of the questions that she was asked could have been answered. We're not talking about top secret, classified, double secret probation type, investigative techniques being used by law enforcement. More importantly, the FBI, of course, who is running this investigation, should be walking in front of the cameras every single day at 11 a.m. and saying, this is what we know today. Do a 5-minute briefing. This is how many shell casings there were on the roof. This is what we know. This is the position of where the counter sniper was that took the shot, et cetera, et cetera. If they just answer these questions every day, then we wouldn't even be needing to see Cheatle in front of a hearing like this.
Yeah. Obviously, there was one of the really infuriating answers that she gave, which is just such a great example. Is one of the questions was about how many times Crooks was seen before the shots were fired, and her answer was between 2 and 5 times. Now, it's 9 days out, right? How do you not have a definitive number of that? Well, how is it such a big range? It makes no sense.
Yeah, I mean, the question to me is, it almost seems like if she did resign, it would be because of public pressure and perception, right? And maybe some enough raging anger, among other partisans in D.C. to get her out. But it's not because there's an actual accountability for any of these agencies or any of these people. And if we look at the history of the Secret Service lately under her watch, as Steve was pointing out earlier before we started the show, there's some cocaine in the White House that they didn't identify the owner of.
That down. No, that was a Secret Service mistake too.
Never mind the fact if Biden really is, out to lunch and has been for years, they've been covering that up as well. And she's good friends with the Bidens. So
Kimberly Cheatle is not going to resign. So what should happen next?
Yeah.
Right? It's clear. If she hasn't done it yet, she's not going to.
She's not going to, but at some point, somebody is going to have to come up to her, and they're going to have to do one of those forced resignation. Do this in a way that we can get rid of you honorably, kind of situation. But she's not going to, because just look at her today. The hubris was there times 1,000, and that's the type of, as Matt was saying, they don't have to, because of the administration we have, the leadership we have over at DHS right now. They don't have to resign when they make a mistake.
Yeah, and I would imagine that it will follow a narrative track. She keeps going to the 60-day review process. Okay, so that gives her 2 months to get a good narrative in place that doesn't make it look completely terrible, but gives some accountability. And then perhaps after that, she steps down. But I think what we're going to find out is that there will be people talking. There is outrage on both sides. And when you get outrage on both sides, people start talking in the media, start leaking things. It won't happen tomorrow. It won't happen next week. But I would imagine in the next few months leading up to the election, and potentially after the election, we're going to get some real answers.
Yeah, and Steve, you've been on this. Isn't it the case that what happened is just CYA all over the place right away, right? They told everyone to clam up and not to tell anyone anything. But as the other Steve points out, that's not going to last forever.
No, by early morning Sunday, there was a gag order placed directly from the top of Department of Homeland Security, more than likely Mayorkas himself. They ordered all of the agents to zip it and literally told them, you cannot speak to your wives, you cannot speak to your own colleagues that weren't on the ground here in Butler County that day. So they were told, if you want to keep your jobs, you will be quiet. They actually said the same thing to the other law enforcement agencies on site. Of course, fortunately, some of them are not taking that because they don't have to worry about their jobs. So they're talking.
Well, Gietl might not have any answers for us today, but Steve Baker will. We are going to be having some breaking news when we come back about Thomas Crooks, the FBI, and the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Don't go anywhere. Oversight Project is a division of the Heritage Foundation, and they released what may or may not be a blockbuster today. And Steve Baker is here to break down all of the details for us. So, Steve, we saw the story earlier, and you have everything that we need to know about it. So tell us.
Well, we did speak to a spokesman from the Oversight Project at the Heritage Foundation today, immediately after this came out. What they are doing is essentially whether FBI is doing it or not, they're not telling us that they're actually involved in this. This is not some sort of secret technology. It's nothing new. We've learned a lot about this even in the January 6th trials about how they're able to track people's cell phones. But see, this is not just law enforcement or government agencies that do this. This is Google. This is, when you walk into a boot store in Nashville, they're going to track you, and then you start getting these ads. It's called ad ID. Every single one of our phones, our cell phones, have essentially what is the same and the equivalency to your social security number. And so once they identify that phone, then they can pretty much track that phone wherever it goes. So here is the gist of what Oversight has discovered through their own tracking, is they were able to ping and identify about 9 different phones at the home of the shooter. You know, the kid, the 20-year-old Crooks. And so they were able to identify which of those phones were then going to his place of business where he works at the nursing home. So after they identify that and make sure that they've got the right ID there for that, now they can track it everywhere else it goes. Well, they followed it to the fairgrounds there, Butler County, where the rally was with Trump, where Trump was shot, and unfortunately other injuries and deaths as well. So what they discovered was that this kid was basically doing recon at that site on July 4th and July 8th. So they were able to track him. But they also learned, and this is very interesting, so this tells us either how smart this kid is or something else, is that he turned his phone off after the 12th, or at least shut down all of the apps on his phone so he couldn't be tracked on the day itself.
Interesting.
But it gets better than that.
Oh, keep going.
Well, it does, because in the process of looking at all of these phones that visited his home and visited the nursing home where he worked, they found a phone that actually pinged 7 or 8 times in D.C. at a building called a Gallery Place, which has a very large footprint of FBI offices and where source meetings and interviews regularly take place in the coffee shop of that particular building.
Yeah, and we can see that on the screen right now. So, okay, so right now we could just say it's circumstantial evidence, but if these are the phones that have been linked to Thomas Crooks and his family and everybody else in there, then this could potentially be something. But don't worry, you guys. The FBI is telling us that they are investigating the matter. We have nothing to fear, right, Steve?
Nothing at all. I mean, obviously, there are many, many non-nefarious reasons why somebody would be at that building in D.C., and indeed there are. But it's very curious, and it's something that we are going to look at. As a matter of fact, Oversight Project has blessed us and given us the data on this so that we can apply our own resources to this as well and assist them in tracking this down.
So it's great work by them, obvious work, but great work because no one's doing it. And, thanks to you, Steve, for talking with them today. We'll see what we can do with this information in the near future. Do they feel as if they've mined everything when it comes to looking at the comings and goings with cell phone data?
Not even close, because this is incredibly tedious work. We're talking about a massive amount of data, and then the process of tracking people and tracking where they go.
It seems that this is the sort of things that other people, independent journalists and organizations, have to do in the absence of the kind of accountability and transparency that we get from an FBI or anyone to say, here's what we've learned so far about the shooter, which has been mostly absent entirely. Are you surprised by what has come out so far? And in essence, the lack of things coming out from the FBI's on telling the public what they know?
Well, what we've learned so far have either been by independent investigators, media investigators, congressional investigators that are on the ground doing the work, who we interact with a lot, our own team here at the Blaze. And otherwise, we're not learning anything. And if they are giving us anything, it's regretfully and under duress.
Let me say, I mean, you're so right about this. It's independent researchers doing this work, but this is a great time to explain the problem with conservative media today, which is you have to take the money, which it'd be expensive to pay private firms to run all this data if you don't have people who are willing to do it because they just want to know the truth. And when you think about, which corporations maybe have that money and don't spend it on this kind of thing, that might be telling. But this is the kind of thing that could be done all the time if we had a proper media. But instead, we end up all banding together just like this and working together to try to find the truth without, a $1 billion company that should be doing this all the time.
And we're getting good information from mainstream media sources as well. I mean, the AP, the New York Times, they have much deeper pockets than some of the right-wing media sources. And so they're able to put 10, 15 20 people on the ground there to track these leads down. And so we're able to pick up a little bit here, and then that gives us a lead to where we need to go.
I have to say, I'm getting a little tired of all these videos, though, of everyone going to the site and then trying to explain what happened. I mean, you know, there's about 1,000 people, it seems like, have gone on YouTube and put up a video.
A little bit better than that. We can do a preliminary report from Senator Ron Johnson, a little bit more credible than those people in all of their videos, that says the would-be assassin Thomas Crooks was spotted by police almost an hour before Trump took the stage. So, Steve, what are some of the latest things that we've been seeing, this drip from the media, and now at least we have some credible sources here from Ron Johnson?
Yeah. Actually, we can almost validate everything that came from Senator Johnson's office. And that reason for that is before the gag order, here at the Blaze Media, we had sources on the ground, and we were able to get incredible intel for that first 12 to 16 hours before the gag order came in. We knew exactly how far the shot was from the counter sniper, 448 yards. I knew the wind direction. I knew how many clicks were on the dial on the scope.
Which Donald Trump said in his speech that night that he affirmed that.
That's right. And then we knew what the deployment actual numbers of United States Secret Service agents were on the ground that day, not only close detail, support detail, but their surveillance, how many snipers they had. All of these things that Johnson has reported have been validated by what we've been able to learn ourselves. The most important thing, though, of all is that siloing of the radio comms. That is why this shot took place, and that is why Trump's close detail, I mean, the good guys, not the DEI hires, but the big guys on stage with him, did not move him off the stage, is because those counter snipers who had Crooks in their sight were having to deconflict, meaning they were told in that 9 a.m. briefing that day that there was going to be a sniper team on that roof. And so when suddenly a kid in the prone position on that roof with a rifle, they didn't know if it was going to be a blue-on-blue shot. They didn't know if they were going to take out one of their own, friend or foe. They had to wait. But the communications were completely, I mean, if there's a moment of incompetency, that is the moment right there.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to do the whole like whataboutism thing here, but how much of this do you think is, this could have been a lot worse, obviously, that it, got extremely lucky to have the shot only graze the ear of former President Trump. But how much of this do you think is related to the kind of bubble that, or just the reaction to the fact that it is Donald Trump, rather than any other major political figure like this, about what we might know publicly without having to do the really big legwork of getting this out there?
I mean, certainly, if it had been Biden that had taken the shot, or even Kamala Harris, or one of the other major protectees, but this is the big thing that nobody is talking about, and that is the idea of a threat matrix. There's nobody bigger with a larger threat matrix over them right now than it is Donald J. Trump, period. As our sources say, times 100. And nobody wants to kill Biden. He's checking out on his own. Doesn't have to happen. Nobody wants to kill Jimmy Carter, who has his own Secret Service protective detail. The biggest and largest person under threat, who should have the largest protection detail right now, is Donald Trump.
But just to be clear, what you're saying is really, really important. I mean, at the heart of everything is, you're saying it was a communication breakdown where the reason they knew he was up there and nothing was done in a variety of directions is because of a communication failure, or at least that's what's coming out now.
That's absolutely correct. As a matter of fact, his close order detail was not hearing it in their ears that there was a problem, or they would have taken Trump off the stage.
We will continue to follow the story. Steve, thanks so much for coming in and bringing this to us today. When we come back, Joe Biden's historic exit almost 100 days out from the election. Up next. Over the weekend, the Biden campaign subtly announced on X that Joe Biden is suspending his re-election campaign. Chris Bedford is the senior politics editor and Washington correspondent for Blaze News. So, Chris, how did we get here with Joe Biden dropping out of the race on Sunday afternoon after he said that he would stay in the race?
It seems like they Stephen Briered him, which is a term that I've heard for the first time this past week, which is when someone's retirement or resignation is announced, maybe possibly without even checking with them, and they end up having to just eventually go along. I mean, the pressure kept on building, and then Joe Biden was too ill, and it was extremely embarrassing, too ill to even be seen in public. Rumors have swirled all around Washington about the president having some kind of a seizure or some more serious malady. I mean, there are questions and rumors right now amongst fairly reasonable and senior people about just how well the president is, considering that he didn't even appear on television. He basically did the equivalent of leaving a Post-it note in the refrigerator that said, "I'm not running," and then later on went with Kamala Harris, and then skipped the event today that Kamala Harris spoke at the White House for the NAACP. This is not just a weak candidate at this point, or a former candidate, but an obviously incredibly weak man. We've seen the doctor's note that's come out since, but at the same time, you have stories coming out in the Wall Street Journal that show that congressional leaders like Nancy Pelosi and House Democrats knew that this was a problem as far back as 2021. I mean, obviously, the American public had been able to see it for even the year before that, but this is something that's been known in Washington, D.C., and it just became untenable.
So, Chris, let's step back a minute. I mean, what we've seen so far, in my mind, has been a narrative arc that made sense. I mean, you saw increasing pressure, some congressmen, then Congress was divided on the matter. You saw, increasingly elite figures coming out, donors coming out, and the pressure went up and up and up and mounted. But this weekend, there's a lack of narrative control, if you will. I mean, what's shocking to me, and I think many people in Washington, D.C., even people on the other side of the aisle, what's shocking many normies is the way in which this went down. It's almost as if at the very end there was someone pushed the fast forward button just for a few seconds to get where we needed to go. And I think a lot of people throughout the country and D.C. itself are startled, a little shocked, and rattled right now. Is that right?
Yeah, it was pretty shocking. I was driving back from a wedding in Pittsburgh when my wife just casually mentioned Joe Biden resigned, at least from the nomination. And I said, she said that at this exact same tone that we'd been speaking for the last hour. So it kind of went by me for a second. And by the time we got over to a gas station, I had hundreds and hundreds of messages from congressional staffers, from different reporters, from analysts around D.C., trying to figure out what exactly was going on. I mean, the pressure had been mounting. By the time Donald Trump was ready to accept the nomination for the GOP, for the Republican Party, there was concrete reporting. Again, always still citing anonymous sources, a back and forth. Was John Meacham, that fake historian, writing the special resignation speech from Joe Biden? Well, he comes out and says he wasn't doing it. Reporters were pretty serious reporters, too. People with years of experience were going back and forth in the source war that just boiled over. And finally, that really strange moment on Sunday where if you're a campaign staffer, except at the very top, most inner circle of Joe Biden's campaign, you found out that your boss had resigned either by Twitter or when your friend or your mother called you or someone who'd seen it before you while you were going about your day on Sunday. And then I think the main thing is that they'd accomplished the first step, which is get rid of Joe Biden. The second step was preventing all-out Democrat civil war. And that seems to be what D.C. got busy with over the next 24 hours.
Steve, I want to bring you into the conversation because I remember back in February watching you on the Glenn Beck program, and you were laying out how you thought that they would get Joe Biden out, but it was your plan during the convention that you were laying out. So take me through what you thought this weekend and how you just see things going forward from here.
Yeah, that was the timing of that was really interesting. So this was almost exactly 5 months ago. This is February 21st. It had just been after Ezra Klein, a very prominent New York Times columnist and podcaster, had written a column essentially saying Joe Biden is too old, he must step down as the nominee, and laying out the case for it. And he was getting a bunch of pushback from a lot of people. But what he was also saying publicly is that privately, I'm hearing that I'm not alone on this. I'm not just going out there on a limb by myself. And that kind of piqued my interest because if Ezra Klein, a very prominent figure there, is saying this publicly, there are other people behind him that are saying that also. So there were a lot of different scenarios. There were scenarios where we could see this happen in the kind of the way that this played out now with him getting out in this way. And there's also scenarios where I think are by the way, are still in play, where whoever it is, whether now it was going to be Joe Biden, whether it now will be Kamala Harris, accepts the nomination on August 22nd, exactly 1 month from today, and then steps down for one reason or another. And there is a 3-week period where the DNC themselves, not the delegates, not the voters, pick the nominee. At that point, the nominee is given, the delegates have gone home, they've done their job, and then you can still make a switch. So I think that there's this story is not over. There's still about a 6 to 8 week period of time where this can continue. But I think that this, obviously, the debate changed everything, but this has been a conversation that's been going on, I think, for several months now, at least, if not years.
Chris, I want to get your reaction to that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the Democrats are already trying to rewrite that narrative. I mean, this was something that was well known. Joe Biden was also behind Donald Trump before that debate in the polls. So that's going to be a difficult thing for Kamala Harris. But now you've got these folks coming out and trying to write Joe Biden's obituary as this incredible president, as opposed to a nearly absent person mentally, whose absence mentally has been noticed for years, someone who was kind of taken advantage of by different Democrat interest groups in the way that bratty grandchildren might take advantage of an elderly grandfather who's babysitting them for the weekend. Oh, Mom lets us have this candy. We need billions of dollars for this. We need billions of dollars for that. That's kind of why you see people like Bernie Sanders and AOC and all these folks who have a real agenda having stood with Biden for so long, because they were able to get away with whatever special interest requests they wanted as he just tried to hold together this coalition. Now you've got Democrats and their friends in the media trying to say he did the noble thing. He stepped aside when it was right. He stepped aside when it was time to let the younger generation do that. Well, that's not true. They ran basically a donor coup on him. They forced him out. It's extremely embarrassing. And now to heap on the shame, they've changed his Twitter account to backing Kamala for president. This is not like a year before he came out and said, you know, I've served my time. I helped get this country back in the right course after the evil orange man, Donald Trump. I'm going to step aside and let the younger people take over. He was absolutely pulled out. And now I'm already starting to see Democrat Twitter talking about how Donald Trump's age is an issue. I mean, the shamelessness with which they're going to turn on this is just incredible. And the way the history books they're trying to write them. But I do think that when people look back on this, when the partisan gaze is over, when the folks who are involved, including ourselves, unfortunately, are gone and no longer able to refute it, they're going to look back and say this was a stand-in president. And it's really a frightening thing where the money and the political party interest in this country, even at such a time of decentralization and internet democracy, are so powerful that we're able to have a stand-in corpse president for basically 4 years.
Hey, Chris, actually, I want to ask you about that because what we're seeing is this Democratic establishment and corporate media just kind of like, oh, well, the story's over. Everything's set now. Kamala's the nominee. Joe finishes his term. But I'm curious if what you're hearing, because I've started to see a little bit of this. It's like, if Joe Biden can't be the nominee, how can he remain the president for the next 4 months? And is that a possibility that there's another shoe to drop where Kamala Harris becomes the president in addition to the nominee?
Well, doesn't it seem like that would be good for her presidential chances, as if she actually has a few months in the office? It seems to me that would make sense for the Democratic Party. Republicans are trying to push this, but really the person the decision is going to come down to in the last minute is going to be Kamala. So it really, I think, is going to depend. Does Joe Biden actually have a serious and rapid decline in health? And we all have had elderly friends and elderly relatives. We're never going to be able to keep the conspiracy theories in check if something happens to Joe Biden, but we know that health can decline extremely rapidly once it starts. That would be something that would suit Kamala Harris well. But I do think also Democrats are looking at this and they're throwing spaghetti at the wall because they're in such a bad position politically in the first place. And I read about this in the newsletter this morning. This sort of solves their Kamala Harris problem for them. After the assassination attempt, prominent Democrats like Gavin Newsom weren't going to just jump in. This looked like a really dangerous race to throw your hat in and risk your reputation on. They were already stuck with Kamala Harris. They didn't know what to do with her. And hey, if she wins, and Republicans should take it seriously that she actually could compete with them. If she wins, then it solves the problem. And if she loses, well, they gave her shot and she can get out of the way and Gavin Newsom and the rest can come out next time.
We'll go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, we will be talking about who we think is actually going to be on that Democrat presidential ticket. Coming up next.
He has already, yes, you may clap.
I love that she always tells us what we're allowed to do. There's been an outpouring of endorsements, though, for Vice President Kamala Harris from powerful Democrats, including Joe Biden. Chris Bedford is still with us. And Chris, in your latest Beltway brief, you said that Harris doesn't fix the Democrat Party woes, but at least there's a plan, right, Chris?
Yeah, well, a convention fight, which was always a possibility, would be an absolute disaster for the Democrats. I mean, it would be great for the political nerds. It'd be absolutely thrilling to watch. But modern politics works much better and more comfortably with simple coronations. And Kamala Harris has had an unbelievable coronation. I think the number stands right now at about $75 million have poured into Democrat coffers since Joe Biden endorsed her. Now, granted, a lot of that money was sitting on the sidelines from donors who were holding back to try and force Joe's hand. But Republicans had enjoyed a real cash advantage, in particular since the Saturday assassination attempt. They'd raised a huge amount of money. And right now, just talking to a Republican money man, he lamented to me, quote, "It was all a dream." The Democrats have caught right back up. And this is something Republicans have to be taking seriously. Democrats have actually managed to stave off that rebellion by going with something that we've talked about at the Blaze a number of times as being kind of the only choice they ever really had to push off civil war. And now they're going to be running an actual campaign with someone who, well, certainly not a great speaker, basically a failure politically in the national level, at least doesn't have a marshmallow brain.
Chris, I know Steve and I want to get back to what happens next with Harris, but I just want to step back to a 50,000-foot level and just reiterate something that we were talking about in the previous a couple minutes ago. Everyone needs to step back and realize that maybe if there was another president, right, and another group of mega donors and media institutions in a big fight, maybe it's the case that the office of the presidency would in fact be more powerful. But what we just saw was a definitive account, right, revealing unto us that the office of the presidency is not more powerful than the donors and the media and the people who literally put Joe Biden there. I mean, that's the takeaway for millions of Americans right now. And so when you move into this next period and you move into the coronation of Harris, which certainly seems like it's happening right now, I'm wondering how many people, even on the Democratic side, are very, very uncomfortable right now with what's going on, because regular voters, regular activists, I mean, this is a leap.
Well, there's a long history of even people who on paper have absolute monarchical or imperial control being removed if they are personally, physically, and mentally enfeebled. They're difficult to defend themselves. I don't think that this coup could have worked on someone like Barack Obama at his level of fitness. But at the same time, you're right, and this is a real risk, and it's so incredible that the Democrats are holding their convention in Chicago in August, just like 1968, where one of the big contributors to the riots and the chaos outside and the violence and the anger in the Democratic Party was that the person who ended up getting nominated hadn't even won a single state. They hadn't even campaigned. The delegates ended up going with LBJ, who was leaving office, going with his vice president and saying he's in charge, partially because the Democratic Party didn't want to deal with the anti-war candidates on the other side who actually won votes, and partially because RFK, everyone's first choice, had been shot and killed on television. So their refusal to go with the anti-war candidates who had won a plurality of the vote, any one of them, and to just do this imperial coronation of someone that the party felt more comfortable with, the party had decided, was one of the things that fueled the anger in the streets. We already know we have Julio Rosas, fresh from Milwaukee, who's going to be heading out to Chicago to cover the DNC. And I don't even think you're going to need tickets inside to see the fireworks, because most of those will be outdoors.
Let me have everybody kind of go around the room and say, do you think Kamala is going to be the Democratic nominee? Chris, you do?
Yes.
Steve?
I think that she accepts the Democratic nomination on that stage next month. And I guess if I'm betting, I'm saying she's the nominee, but I think that there's a good chance that she isn't also.
So he says 90% Harris, like 10% chaos?
Yeah.
Something like that?
That,
okay,
sure.
I like it. Peterson?
I'm probably about the same as Steve, about 90, okay. 90% is a good number. I think there's still an outside chance that some shenanigans could happen and some, where basically when volatility increases, you don't know what's going to happen. But right now, it certainly looks like everyone is obviously coalescing around Kamala.
Because I get the sense, right, if you just go back to the Bernie Bros, when they had that convention, right, the Democrats don't care what your rules are. They'll change them as they need to, right? So when you get Kamala Harris as the party nomination, the primaries have already taken place, you guys. So this switch out is going to be more difficult than even we're sitting here talking about, Chris.
Well, it's going to work on paper. It's going to work with the campaign finance. It's going to work with maintaining the same campaign structure. And that's actually something that's really strongly on her side. As well, she will undoubtedly be bringing in her top heads and the folks who are very close to Joe Biden, who boxed her out and disrespected her over the years. I would be worried for their jobs if I were them. But the broader campaign structure of the modern campaign, which takes a year, 2 years, 3 years to build, unlike previous times in American history, she is getting that. It's being handed over to her. All of the keys. They've literally just changed out the social media backgrounds. They're ready to go. To build that takes months and months and months. No one else has that. The top contenders who are actually interested in doing this, or previously were maybe before the debate, they've already thrown their support behind her. Maybe partially that's because I think that it's a doomed mission and one that they're willing to sit out. They don't actually think there's that much glory at the end of this, at least not that much power, even if there is glory. She has all of these things working in her favor. You've got Nancy Pelosi, who finally came out and said that she's backing Kamala Harris, and all the donors with a smattering of mega donors. But when you're the Democratic Party, you can afford to tick off a couple mega donors. You've got a ton of them that you protect their interests. You're friends with them. So right now she's sitting pretty, and I can't see who would be in a position to challenge her, who would also want to challenge her. Now, one person who hasn't endorsed yet is Michelle and Barack Obama, and that's interesting. The Obamas don't like Kamala Harris. They've seemingly never liked Kamala Harris. When Kamala Harris was the first Democrat vice presidential woman of color nominee, Michelle Obama couldn't even be bothered to re-record her congratulatory message to include Kamala. So that's one group that's set aside. But hey, at least they got their dream of getting rid of Joe.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned the donors, right? That most of the donors, the big donors, seem to have been coalescing behind Kamala. But then you have people like Reed Hastings of Netflix that's gone public and said, I want someone who can win the swing states and not necessarily whether Kamala Harris can. And it got me thinking, how much of this is going to come down to the polls? Because you could make the case that if the polls were a little better over these last 2 or 3 weeks, that if the debate really wasn't the debacle that everyone thought it was, maybe Biden could have sustained and he could have kept around, but it really was, a disaster for him. So what happens in the next 2 or 3 weeks if it actually looks like these things get worse for the Democrats and there isn't this galvanization of the Democratic Party, the voters behind Kamala Harris? Then could they look at that and say, okay, throw out the rules. We've got another plan in place. Let's let another shoe drop and maybe make her the president and then get a new nominee for 2024, something like that.
I mean, they could, but at that point, who's going to want to step in?
Yeah.
I think you're right. They would like to change anything. They would like to move this. And Kamala Harris not only gets all of the problems that the Joe Biden administration has that are attached to her, all of the lies about his health. She was the lead cheerleader that he's absolutely fine. But Joe Biden, as an insurance policy to keep her out of the presidency, gave her the most intractable problems, ones that the Democrat base refuses to let them solve. He said, go, you're in charge of the border. And her aides were so angry they were leaking at the time. Kamala Harris has been put in an impossible position to try and keep her down by the White House. They don't want her to rise up. They don't want her to succeed. And of course, she was completely incapable of it. And I don't see that she's going to really be able to change the polls. I guess we'll know over the next week if that happens. But the chance for Democrats to reverse her situation is difficult. She's not going to be a great candidate in the swing states, which is why they're out there. This is maybe one of the only jobs in modern America where people are looking for a Republican state white male who's middle-aged to take the job. But that's basically the only candidates they're looking for vice president. That's not going to change anything. So, but at that point, when you're looking at this and then you're 2 months out from an election, I don't see Gavin Newsom saying, fine, I'll stand in front of that train. It would just be a tough job, and Big Mike's not coming to save anyone anytime soon. She doesn't like any of them.
Well, I think what's interesting about it right now is you see two opposing forces among people who are knowledgeable in the Democratic Party. One is just the excitement, right? I mean, the wine and excitement is at fever pitch. I mean, these people are genuinely excited about Harris. Anyone new in the race has excitement. You can see that building on one side of it. And on the other side of it, you have people who understand that she is an awful manager of people. No one can stay with her, and she's really never won anything nationally to speak of. And in many ways, it is the disaster that everyone's been talking about, and people on the left as well as the right are aware of that fact. So Is there going to be any breaks here? I mean, the obvious thing to do is go after a swing candidate, but I think unless what Steve is saying happens, unless her support craters even more, I don't see the smart choice happening, because they're going to have to deal with a left that's very excited right now. I mean, the left is pretty jazzed about this.
Yeah, and particularly that all-important voting bloc they peeled off of Donald Trump, which is suburban white women. I mean, Arlington, Virginia right now has got to be absolutely electric. You saw the tweets of the first Kamala Harris campaign sign put out in front of the Naval Observatory by this woman in Lululemon walking her two fancy dogs. And that's in the District of Columbia, which I think is 95, 96, 97% Democrat. It's going to mobilize people like that, the folks in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And those people have an incredible amount of power in the Democratic Party. And if you want to double check that, just see why the president of the Teamsters Union was speaking at the RNC. Just ask why the dock workers unions and folks in Chicago and Philadelphia were reaching out to Donald Trump to save their statue when the Democrats were tearing it down. There's a huge disempowered coalition to the Democratic Party, and those folks who are in control are that kind of white woman college professor stuff that James Carville's always complaining about. And those people really like Kamala.
Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Always great stuff.
Have fun without me.
We will. We'll try, at least. The company behind last week's massive tech outage has some dubious ties to global enterprises. We'll expose those next. A Windows update leading to the grounding of thousands of flights while banks and services for 911 were taken offline. Peter Gietl, the managing editor for Return, is here to explain more about the company behind the blackout, which is CrowdStrike. So, Peter, CrowdStrike, they're tied to a number of global, we could say, some nefarious enterprises. But what are some of the organizations that they're partnered with?
Well, they're one of these security organizations that has deep ties to the security state, and you run across these type of organizations sometimes, and they pop up, and you're like, "Wow, it's so strange the connections they have." One obvious one is they're a security partner with the World Economic Forum, and they have been since 2015. But to really understand this company, you have to go back to 2022, and their chief security officer is Sean Henry, who's a former assistant director of the FBI. And he came in, and there's a large contingent of former FBI agents that run this organization. And then they're at the nexus of a lot of these issues coming together where, for instance, in 2014, with the hack of Sony, they were the ones telling everyone that it was obviously the North Koreans, and the North Koreans were so upset about a film that came out that that's the real reason. And there's been a lot of reporting and sources since from Hollywood Reporter that it was definitely not the North Koreans, it was an internal leak. And then fast forward to 2015, they get involved with the World Economic Forum. 2016, they're tasked with investigating what happened with the DNC leak, which is strange that the FBI wouldn't be investigating this. Instead, they outsource it to this other company. They come in, they say, "Oh, it's definitely Russia. It's obviously Russia. There's no way that anyone can contradict this." And then this leads to the entire Russian collusion narrative that dogged President Trump during his entire first term. It leads to, in 2019, he had the perfect call with Zelensky that led to his impeachment, where he actually mentioned CyberStrike as wanting to find out more information about what was going on with this company. So again, they're just involved with all kinds of interesting, weird things. And then it comes out that they're responsible for the blue screen of death.
Can you explain to people what they do? I mean, besides investigate, right, in these examples you brought up, I mean, can you explain just what they do and maybe go from there to what happened the other day?
Sure. They have a wide variety of services that they sell to DoD and, I mean, some of the largest Fortune 500 companies in the world, as well as governments, medical industry. In this specific case, they were tasked with providing cloud-based security to protect against hacks, specifically anything involved with a connection to the internet. And they sent out an update apparently that caused the entire system to crash all across the world. And in some ways, it's kind of disturbing that one single company would have what's called kernel access to the servers at this level across so many different industries. I mean, I was talking with Steve Baker before I came on here. He was driving around and he could, like, all the gas pumps were out and he couldn't even use his credit card. I was delayed this weekend with my flight. I mean, it was a huge effect across the country.
I saw that too at the airport. What kind of accountability or oversight could there be for a company like this, especially in the context of what they, just caused on Friday?
I mean, it's a really good question. I don't think we know that yet. I mean, there's probably going to be a congressional hearing regarding this, but again, it's what I was speaking about before. It's one of these companies that's deeply tied into the security state, and there actually doesn't seem to be a lot of oversight over the fact that they have access to some of the most important servers all over the world for the most important industries.
Interesting, Matthew. For me, it feels like we're going to go back to one of those terms, too big to fail, right? Oh no, they're too big. We can't regulate them. We need them to go through and do the jobs that we've asked them to do.
Yeah, it's also one of these things where they're big, but it's also interconnected, as Peter's saying. So it's a very complicated company that's connected in complicated ways to a lot of complicated other entities, and all of them sort of march in the same direction and move in the same direction. So it's hard to sort of untie all the knots, and it seems almost as if you have a system that's set up that way on purpose because it's in everyone's interest not to get in trouble and not to be held accountable. And what's really, I think, terrifying in some ways about this is, the timing in which it occurred, and then the sort of signals that it sends to people throughout the world. And there's a real need for people to understand exactly what is going on, and a real need for those in authority to figure out ways to hold these people accountable, because sometimes it's quasi-governmental, NGOs, and private, and it's all mixed in there together.
Final word quickly.
Well, it doesn't hurt when Nancy Pelosi owns $2 million worth of your stock and the largest investor is BlackRock and Vanguard.
That'll do it.
Shocking.
That will do it, because you always have to follow the money. That one will always be true. So, Peter, thanks so much for coming in today.
Thank you.
And Steve, great to have you in studio as well. Really, really appreciate you coming in as well.
Good to be here. Thanks.
All right. Well, you know what? Make sure to go subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to rate and review the show, because that helps others discover the show as well. And you guys, if there's anything that we know, it's that 2024 is a breaking news cycle. We knew that it was going to be an insane year for news. I don't think that we thought when we launched this show, a week and a half ago, that we would have an attempted assassination on Donald Trump and Joe Biden would be posting on X. Well, that's going to be it for him.
I think we should make it a weekend show, because
we
that's
should.
when all the news happens.
That's a great point. We're going to have to start going live at some point when all this news does break. But until then, go follow us on your favorite podcast platform and rate and review. So we'll be back with you to break all of it down coming up tomorrow, because we know that chaos is just around the corner. Thanks for watching.